I'd like to say good evening to everyone. By design, I'm a propeller head. By birth, sometimes some say. And the last number of years, growing in this thing called business, entrepreneurship, it has become a source of some wonderful things. It has led to the creation of AIRR, and it is an acronym of a number of things, one of which is advancing innovation using regional resources. And in the spirit of alternative talent development, I'd like to kind of share with you a phrase that business partners and I coined about 10 years ago. So we coined this phrase. We called it the 3 feet rule. And it's really simple, but it's profound. We found that any and everything you need to be successful in life, God has put 3 feet within your grasp. The challenge is most of us, we can't see it. We don't know it's there. Since I'm in the scriptural vein, we suffer from what that church called Laodicea in Revelation 3 suffered. They were blind and had no idea. And so the prophet said what they needed to do was to buy some eye salve so that they could see. 3 feet, it's right there. We'd go through projects, we'd have events, we would think we didn't have the proper or the right quantity of resources, and all of a sudden, bam, the solution to our problem was right there. 3 feet rule. And for me, it really all started at a place very similar to this. I grew up in a very small rural town in the state of Alabama, and I just say that our family was economically strapped. Now, my uncle, who always keeps me honest, says, no, we weren't economically strapped, we were poor. And my grandfather, who was a farmer, farmed for a guy, and it was about maybe a 30-mile commute from our hometown to where he farmed, and so he always had a late model truck that he drove from home to the farming community. And what was really cool, my grandfather had this knack. He had a difficult time while he was driving his pickup truck, riding by items that had been discarded by other people and leaving them alone. And so he'd ride by, he'd pull the truck over it, throw it in the back of the truck, and over time he would accumulate vast amounts of interesting things. At least his grandson thought they were. And so he had so much stuff, he built this thing we lovingly call the shed, and he had all kind of cool stuff, and this was my playpen. It was really neat because you couldn't really tear anything up because most of the stuff that was there was already torn up. So you could poke and plunder and do all those sorts of things. And it wasn't long before his grandfather began to accumulate bicycle parts. And that's just a great thing for a 9-year-old. Again, remember, 3 feet. Mom, I want a bike when we don't have the money. Okay, but Papa had a shed full of bike parts. So in the spirit of building a bicycle and becoming a very proficient bicycle mechanic, we were able to experiment. We were able to innovate. We take the center sprocket out of 10 speeds and put them in 20-inch frames. Learned about gear ratios early on in life. We would take hacksaws, because my father had tools, and we would cut off the forks from 10 speeds. We would hammer them into the 20-inch frame. We would take them down to the welder, and for 25 cents, he would tack weld them together, and we would have our own choppers. And so we did this year in and year out. By the time I was 12, BMX racing was all the rage, and everyone on the planet in that sphere wanted a BMX racer with the mongoose rims. And so I mentioned it enough to Mom, and she and Dad pinched their pennies, and they bought me the BMX racer with the mongoose rims. But what they didn't realize about their son, he was only interested in the mongoose rims. I mean, shucks, he didn't need any more bicycles. Actually, he had so many bicycles, his parents would tell him to make sure that he moved the bicycles so they could park the cars. So he got the BMX racer with the mongoose rims, and He realized there were some flaws in the Mongoose rims because if you got up to certain speeds, the bike didn't ride smoothly, it would bounce because the circles or the rims weren't true. So what do? Well, you take that bike apart, you discard the vast majority of the bike, and you keep what's valuable, or at least it was in my community, and you sell the valuable parts so that you can have money to go buy more parts to build more bikes. And then when your father finds the burlap sack with the other parts in it and asks you what that is, and you can't lie and you tell him, well, that is the remnants of the bike that you and mom bought, he tells you if your mama ever finds out, she's going to kill you. But you can't turn this mindset off. So a few years later, my uncle retires out of the Air Force. He travel the world, he moves back to my small hometown, and he introduces the entire town to something called a computer. I'd never seen one, heard about them. It changed my life. Actually, he moved to my hometown, we moved back the summer of 1983. By that Christmas, my mom told my dad, I know we don't have the money, but if we ever want to see that boy again, we better put a computer in this house. And so it took me through college and learned all these wonderful things about technology. And, IT is kind of like medicine, kind of like law. You have all these different verticals. You don't go to a podiatrist to have surgery on your heart. And so he found his niche, which was internet working. It's just really cool to be able to talk on one side of the planet with the other. So really cool. And if that link that you have breaks, you have other links, and the data just finds its way from point A to point B. That is so cool. But keep in mind the 3 feet rule. And as time went on, I began to, probably 15 years ago, take note of these cities, because if you're in internet working, you deal with telcos, and you know how difficult telcos can be. And you know how oftentimes their choices are not driven by innovation, but by the bottom line. So sometimes telecommunications companies are very non-innovative. And so Boyd began to say, how can communities, how can cities, municipalities, what can they do to be innovative in that space? Because that's what he did, and that's what he does. And so about 15 years ago, he began watching this movement called municipal broadband, community-owned broadband. It was revolutionizing the planet. And some of you probably, in the last year or so, have heard about a few projects. Chattanooga, Tennessee, the first gigabit city in the country, right up the road. And everybody's heard about Google and their fiber project. They've done a deployment in Kansas City, Missouri. It's funny, I have family in Austin, and I follow the stuff in the industry so closely. My sister was there, and about a year ago, I told her it was coming. And when it did arrive, all her friends were calling and saying, oh, we're going to get this, get that. She said, yeah, my brother told me about that a year ago. But that's not here. Because keep in mind, I'm an advocate of the 3 feet rule. I want to know, is there something within the region that will allow me to have those innovative technologies? I'm a voracious reader. And about a few years back, I'm reading this article, and it's talking about this community called Opelika, Alabama. And I was interested in the article because I had lived there about 9 years, went to school there, began my professional career there. And I'm reading down through the article, and the article is talking about smart grid and, having power companies being able to more efficiently deliver power and be able to track rates and all this wonderful stuff. And there was one little line in there that said that the city, in deploying this smart grid technology, is seriously considering doing a fiber play, a triple play, voice, video, and data in Opelika, Alabama. I said, man, that'd be really cool, because that's 3 feet. And so I began to kind of watch that and look at that. And along the way, this little city that's about 50 some odd miles down the road, they began to redevelop the downtown, and it just really transformed it from the way I remembered it when I lived there. And lo and behold, this past summer, Opelika, Alabama became the first gigabit fiber city in the state of Alabama. Can you believe that? 3 feet. But it gets better. In my travels, I frequent this place. Some of you may have heard of it. It's called Silicon Valley. And I love playing with GIS software and things of that sort. And one day I'm measuring the valley, and I came up with the fact that it's about 55 miles, from upper San Francisco down to lower San Jose. And all that talent, and I have this habit when I go into rooms, when I go to meetings, when I'm at events like this, I'll sit in the corner, not say anything, and watch people. I love watching people. I love watching people interact. And so every time I would go to this place, specifically in Palo Alto, I would sit at the coffee shops and watch the people interact and watch the socializing. And I began to notice the people, and as I'm sitting there, my mind went back to the bicycles. I realized there was nothing special that they had that we didn't have here. 3 feet. And so I looked at that, and I was playing with that GIS software one day, and I looked at the distance between Montgomery and Opelika, and guess what? It's right around the same distance as the distance of the valley. More importantly, I began to look at all the talent that existed down that corridor, all the universities, all of the IT talent at Maxwell Air Force Base. I began to look at all of the things that are here within 3 feet. But then it got better. I told you I'm a voracious reader, and sometimes I'm reading articles that some would want to know why. But I'm reading one day back in 2011, and at the time, there was a piece of legislation going through the House of Representatives in the state of Alabama, and it was called House Bill 154. As I'm reading it, it states that the state was considering giving serious tax incentives to individuals that build data centers. Data centers in Alabama? Wow, that would be great. And it became law, and next thing you know, some of the more astute economic minds in the state developed a world-class data center in downtown Alabama. I said, wow, 3 feet. I've visited many a time, and I've seen bigger centers, but I haven't seen any nicer within 3 feet. Oh, it got better. For the last number of years, the SEC has been contemplating this concept called crowdfunding. And although the laws are on the books, they've yet to sign off on it or make the last signature. Yet there is this contingent plan or this area of gray that allows states to do something of that nature. Many of you have heard of Kickstarter, you've heard of Indiegogo, you've heard of these things, but those really aren't purely crowdfunding mechanisms. I mean, where citizens can bypass Wall Street and just give money to people to build companies. Startup capital. And so I'm reading this New York Times, this Wall Street Journal article, and they're talking about some states who are taking advantage of it. And Kansas was mentioned, but also Georgia. Who would ever think? Georgia. So reading down through the article, and I get to the last paragraph, and they said there are other states that are considering it, and they listed North Carolina, and then they mentioned Senate Bill 44 in the state of Alabama. I said, wait a minute, you mean to tell me Alabama's going to be on the cutting edge of crowdfunding? So that if I have this great idea, I can go to my families and my friends, and they can invest in me? 3 feet. And so some people began to think about this and analyze it, and they said, you know what, we have everything that this place has, so what's stopping us from doing this? So before you leave this evening, you got to talk to Miss Lynetta Banks and the Silicon Black Belt effort. That's how some are considering advancing innovation with regional resources that are 3 feet within our grasp. My name is Boyd Stevens, and I'm with AIRR, where we seek to advance innovation using regional resources. Thank you for your time.